Great. So thank you so much, Justin, for the introduction. Today, we are very honored to have two young entrepreneurs joining us to share their stories. So in this session, we really want to give you some inspiration about the journeys of others, what they have been through as an entrepreneur, and they will share with us how they started their own venture, what they have been through, and finally, they will give you some advice for all of you here joining us, whether you are a student and innovator or you're a startup trying to make a difference. We hope that their advice will be useful to you. So, first of all, I think we should be introducing our speakers. So, maybe I'll first pass the time maybe to Alvin. Would you mind introducing a bit about yourself?
Hi, thank you, Janice. Thank you for having us here. My name is Alvin Cheng. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Handy Rehab. We are a Hong Kong-based R&D company. So we design and develop affordable robotics for rehabilitations. We also do distributions of medical devices as well as robot devices in Hong Kong. Our focus is mainly in the hospitals and healthcare sectors. So our customer base are mostly hospitals as well as elderly homes or non-profits clinics as well.
Great. So great to have you, Alvin. So how about Natalie? Would you mind telling us a bit about yourself as well?
Sure. Thank you for having me at Hack Asia panel. My name is Natalie. I'm working at DFI Retail Group as a sustainability associate. But then I founded my own environmental social enterprise, Fair Hong Kong, back in 2015 when I was in my first year of undergrad. Our organization focuses on promoting ecotourism in Hong Kong as means to mitigate climate change because we realize that aviation emissions account for a large portion of per capita carbon footprint among Hong Kong people. And we're also gradually expanded our business to climate education and training for corporates in school, hoping to influence more people to take active climate action and also brainstorm decarbonization solutions for our planet.
Thank you so much, Natalie. So I think from their introduction, they're very humble. Actually, I think their franchise actually got a lot of recognitions externally. So I think it's indeed very honored to have both of you joining us today. So I guess for you guys, you might wonder why we actually invited them, right? So they're actually working in spaces maybe not exactly related to the challenge statement that you're going to be solving for, but there's some commonalities when it comes to how do you really apply business and technology to actually address some of the sustainability challenges or to create social impact. So really want to use two examples of something not related to you to give you some inspiration to hoping that to empower you with, I guess, the right mindset and the right skill set to actually launch your own venture. So maybe I think we should start from day zero. So we want to go back to where you guys actually started. So I mean, all of us here actually might have many different ideas, right? And then for many of us, we actually did not start a business, or if we start a business, we might pivoted many, many different times. But I guess it's always important to think back into day one where we, I guess, think about the idea and how everything started. So Alvin, can you tell us more about how did you get involved in your current startup when it first began?
I first began about almost 5 years ago when I met my partner who is an biomedical engineer. We started this project, this company or this product because we want to help those in need. So for myself, there's a personal story behind it. One of my family members, an uncle of mine, he got a stroke about 15 years ago. And since then, he has been living in our rehab center. And he lost mobility of half of his side, so he can barely walk, and he lost. He simply cannot work since then. He was only 30-something years old when he got a stroke. So that impacted me a lot. And when I met my partner, who is also in the field of R&D of this kind of technologies, we naturally came together, and we want to build something for stroke patients to help them regain mobilities and regain control of their hands.
That's actually very interesting. So it's also something that there's a big problem here, but it might be something you started because you see it happening to someone around you, and that's something very personal to you. And I guess that's also why you're still working on it after so many years as well. So how about you, Natalie? How did you first started your own venture?
Right.
What really inspired you in part of the process? Because I mean, I know that you have been very passionate about topics related to climate change. I know that you care a lot about that. But what was really the inspiration, I guess, at that point in time?
So I actually started FAIR at a similar setting like Hack Asia. When I was in my first year of undergrad, I joined a competition called the COP21 Challenge, organized by the French consulate, because that was right before the COP21 Paris Agreement conference. And at that session, we listened to a talk that walked through about aviation emissions in the world and in Hong Kong. And I realized that these emissions is usually not accounted for in government reports because of double counting and its transboundary nature, compared with other apparent environmental issues such as electricity consumption or water wastage. I think aviation emission is relatively not visible to the public, so I wish to promote carbon literacy of the public on this aspect. And even before then, I was usually traveling abroad quite frequently with my parents, and I did not know about aviation emission as an important source of emissions myself. So I think maybe we could start an online platform that promotes this idea and also compare attractions in Hong Kong with like famous attractions elsewhere, like in Japan or in Korea. So people can gain the touristic motivation to travel around Hong Kong and also gain deeper understanding into our biodiversity and ecological diversity. Then we gradually pivoted to offline tours because we realized there is a demand for it. People not only want to consume these kind of touristic information, they also want actual tours that they can participate in and to learn from what we are to advocate or educate for.
So that's actually also very interesting that you mentioned. I guess like you see like a much bigger problem that is happening, and you're thinking about specifically, I guess, the aviation industry and perhaps your role to play in helping to make a difference as well. So I think that is very interesting. Another point of view on how you started is like quite contrasting. Like one is very personal, one is the bigger picture, but eventually like you are getting to, I guess, the impact side of things as well. So that's great. So I think that's how you guys started, but I also want to kind of move like a little bit ahead in time. How did like what is actually the like now you had the idea that at that point in time, like what was actually the first thing you built? Like what is that about? How did that came about? Like from the idea to, I guess, the initial venture. Maybe Alvin, can you share about like maybe your first product, how what really that is? Yeah.
I think back to before what the first thing that we built is that what the first thing that I did. So I care about the root cause of problems and the user feedback. So when I joined with my partners, he already have something on hand. It's like a prototype. I have a lot of wires, cables, electronic components, like all exposed together. Not very sexy at all, but it's functional. So we stop there, and then we go out and reach out to individual stroke patients, as well as like professional therapists or doctors, ask for their advice, ask for their like real user feedbacks, because they are the persons that's gonna pay for that equipment at last. So the first thing we did is actually going out, ask for their advice, and trying to grab holds on what the market, what the patients really want from these products. And from there, we did a lot of iterations. We built a lot of things, and some didn't work, we put it away, and then some worked that we keep moving on and improving it. And that's how we get to this point, I think.
So what did you discover through the conversation? What worked and what does not? Is it exactly the same as what you imagine people's feedback would be, or is it completely different?
It's not exactly as I was expecting, or we were expected, or we designed in the first place. Because as engineers ourselves, myself is not an engineer. I have a business background, so engineers always like try to overkill problems, or try to solve problems that might not exist, right? For like commercial sales, they try to like sell what you have right now. Sometimes you're overpromise some things, right? So our job as an entrepreneur is actually there to be the bridge between R&D as well as commercializations. Try to bridge the gap between that and bring the two parties closer together to one point that we can compromise on functionality, cost, as well as the selling price of each product. And I think one of the parts that I can, so one of the products, the first products, the flagship product we built is a robotic glove that goes on the hand of stroke patients. We designed it like a human hand palms. So at the beginning, we figured that we should have like different components on different fingers, or same as what our hand should look like. But at the end, we took out one part of the pinky palm of their glove, because we realized that it's actually they don't really need that part of their products.
Unless you want to do a pinky swear, right?
Yes, exactly. Or the use of the actual medical term is that the rehabilitation use of the pinky is actually very limited. So and the use of it is very private. So you don't need to spend that much time or that much effort into rehabilitating your pinky, and that would actually and adding that extra component, it actually causes more and causing more reliability issues or other technical issues on the product. So we decided to take it out even after we have built it already. So that's one of the parts that we didn't realize until we actually push our product out to the market and let people to try use on it.
I think that's actually a very good advice for the Hackasia participant as well. So it's really about not just like have an idea and go straight to build it, right? It's really about maybe taking a step back, really understanding the need of the users. Who are you trying to build the solution for? And kind of pivot from there, right? Like your first design and your last design possibly is very different as well. It's like a constant iteration process that you have been through.
Exactly.
Cool. So maybe Natalie as well. So I think you already touched on your pivot, but I guess when you first started, it's only a online platform that you have built, right? Can you tell us about what actually is the first thing you built and how I guess it eventually evolved to what it is right now, which is an online plus an offline kind of components of your venture?
Right. So we initially started as a website, a digital platform, because we wanted to showcase some of the attractions in Hong Kong that are comparable to elsewhere. And we even showcase how much carbon emission you can save by staying in Hong Kong rather than going to somewhere overseas to see the similar kind of geological features or ecological features. But then we realized a problem is that most people and most of our judges at social enterprise competition love traveling. And they really hate this kind of guilt trapping. You're telling them because you're going elsewhere, you're generating this much emission. And we also realized there are some natural assets in Hong Kong that are not found elsewhere. Why not we just promote the intrinsic beauty of Hong Kong to the public, not to guilt trip them, but to attract them to stay locally by showcasing them how cool a local tour can be and rebranding this concept of local tourism as a climate tour or environmental education tour to appeal to different audiences like young families, schools, and younger children. So we decided to take another approach of just showing how pretty or how valuable Hong Kong attractions are instead of telling people you shouldn't travel elsewhere, because we think that should come at a later stage. When the uptake of local tourism increases, then naturally maybe like overseas tourism will decrease. And we also try to track our impact by giving out evaluation forms after our tours and pre and post intervention, looking at the social impact this tour has brought and trying to develop mechanisms to evaluate the exact amount of, the exact educational effect that we're able to achieve. But then we still found it quite difficult to track how much emissions we've reduced because of our tour, because oftentimes it's a long-term behavioral change rather than going on one tour, then you can automatically switch to sticking to local tour. I mean, COVID has done its effect on dragging all people to stay locally, so our model has also switched a bit after COVID. But then I think it's important to keep in mind to all entrepreneurs out there how you evaluate your impact and how to best approach your audience in a way that they feel comfortable with it.
So it's actually quite interesting. Can you tell us more about like when you first built, I guess the first thing, which is I guess the online elements of that, telling people like how much carbon footprint you are creating as a result of your traveling, right? I'm sure that a lot of people actually wouldn't know about that. Like that was
Wouldn't
your
want to know, right?
yes, actually, as someone who's very passionate about traveling around the world, I actually do not want to know as well. So like, how do people first perceive that? I mean, like some people might be very supportive, right? Like it's like a wake up call for them. But you were saying some people were like kind of like not really buying into the idea. Like from your conversation with people, how did they feel about the first idea that you got?
I think it was half-half. Like half of the people are receptive of what we're doing and kind of like recognize that they need some sort of behavioral change. And all along we were just promoting to reduce the amount of tours every year, because we have done some market research among university students, and we found out the average tours they go on every year is around 4 to 6. So some people actually go on like 10 plus tours every year, and some tours are just for like 2-3 days over long weekend. So we think by reducing these kind of flash tours, you can already significantly reduce your carbon footprint because, for example, one round trip from Hong Kong to Japan is around 0.5 tons of carbon emissions. And annual carbon emission per capita for Hong Kong people is around 6 tons. So you can see that going to Japan for 10 times already doubles your annual emissions. By reducing one time, it's already like almost 10% of reduction. So we try to pitch this idea more, but still it infuriates some of the population who really enjoys traveling. And I think it's also important to keep in mind that 80% of all flights, for example, in the UK, is only made by 20% of the population. So we're talking about a very privileged population that are not aware of the problem, but they are creating most of the problem. So we wish people could take initiative and like understand the greater perspective of this, but then we also recognize using the guilt approach is not the best. Maybe instilling some hope, instilling empowerment, empowering what they can do about it. Or, for example, we did some policy advocacy around carbon offsetting, setting tighter regulations around carbon offsets in the world and in Hong Kong, so that people who really needs to travel, like there's a necessity, then they can opt for those options as well. So we did some collaboration with university on this kind of research.
So that's very interesting. So before I go back to Alvin, one last question. So you actually challenged the orthodoxy that traveling has to be you from one place to another place abroad, flying from one spot to the other. You're challenging that and you're saying that, well, hey, you can travel locally. The experience can still be really cool. I think a lot of people, especially, I guess, for a certain group of us, it's very hard for us to kind of believe that. But I guess COVID also changed people's perception as well. So did you see like some of the macro forces like COVID accelerating perhaps the change of people's perception towards certain ideas, especially your venture maybe?
Yeah, totally. I remember there was a paper about the necessity of traveling and like whether we really need it. It's an academic research, and it shows that most of the tools that perceived to be needed is actually not that needed when people are drilled to answer deeper questions. I think COVID is a wake-up call for everyone, especially for business travels, whether there's the necessity of doing so. And I heard from IKEA that they actually stopped over 80-90% of the overseas travel, but they can still operate normally and even better in some of the cases. So I think this is important for a realization that we can also try to strike the balance between local tourism and overseas tourism. And at the same time, we see a lot of untapped potential in tourism around the world, especially in restorative and ecotourism, because now we're looking into a more regenerative economy rather than extractive. As we see from COVID, it was like nature's revenge. We were trying to extract too much and think in a linear way instead of a circular way. So we see some overseas resort projects. They are actually built around a narrative of restoring the habitat, like by gaining the capital to build a resort that facilitates the government to gain enough capital to rebuild a forest or improve biodiversity of that spot. So I think these concepts can also be integrated back in the Hong Kong's picture, especially when the government is pushing hard on rural conservation and rural revitalization. So these are potentials that we can tap in, as well as the rise of virtual tourism with AR and VR elements that VER is also exploring. And we did several virtual tours with schools earlier this year, and their feedback were quite positive. And we saw greater revenue as well because it's less labor intensive. We can use similar online materials to replicate it to our different clients. So we will keep on expanding this arm.
So it's very interesting to see how you pivot from, I guess, a website to the offline elements and now exploring maybe how technology, VR, AR, how does that redefine travel? So it's really interesting. So I want to go back to Alvin because I know, Alvin, you started your journey quite a few years ago. So I guess we talk about your first product and I guess how you pivot your first product of the kind of like the arm. Like how about like since then, how have you kind of ventured to different areas? Did you bring new products? Did you expand your company's offerings? Do you go more back into R&D? So how did you pivot your venture after you got your first product?
We in the simplest sense, we simply go expand more horizontally, as well as we want to go deeper into our field. Horizontal-wise, we try to expand our business more overseas. But with COVID, we blocking like stopping all the travels as well as like some of the overseas trading as well. So we're trying to expand more deeper in Hong Kong right now. So on one hand, we have our R&D arm, where we design and develop more products, where we can push it to the market as well. The other hand is that we develop our own distribution and sales network, at least locally, right here in Hong Kong. So we have our salespersons as well as BD persons going out to hospitals and different elderly homes like on a daily basis, where we can get a more and more direct customer touch point, as well as in a commercial sense is like grasping more revenue in terms down the value chain of that. So and I think that's quite healthy for our company. Because on one hand, we can generate sustainable income that keeps our team growing. On the other hand, is that we can help our engineers to find out problems, because a lot of time there, when our customers, we build trust between us and the customers, they will come to us with their like real life problems. So, for example, this hospital, they're doing a renovation projects. They want to renovate the whole rehab sectors, and they will come to us and ask for our opinions, like what kind of things that they should put it into their rehab centers or their hospitals as well. And that is like the problems that we want trying to solve, or we want to find for every entrepreneur. So that is like real gold for us, and that keeps us going, and that keeps our like both their sales work and the engineering work like interesting and more dynamic.
So actually, that's very interesting because like you started with, I guess, understanding needs and you build your first product. And I guess like for you as you scale, right, you mentioned, well, the product is great, but like in order for you to become more sustainable, like I guess as a business model, you actually go down the value chain as well. So like are there challenges going that route? Because there might be an area that you are less familiar with, right? So when it comes to scaling your business, how did that happen? How did you find an experience in that particular part of the journey?
Yeah. There are indeed a lot of challenges. I think it requires different skill sets in terms of our team's capacities, and also like we have to wear different hats. It cannot be the product designer or the project manager all the time. I have to go out and do sales pitches, and sometimes pitch to clients that I've never met, or I don't know what they want really at all. And also on the other hand, we have to go to source products that might be useful for our customers. So that one thing is like the requirement of different skill sets. And I think for like our fellow entrepreneurs as well is that I think it comes to my personality as well, because I don't like stop doing one things and keep doing one thing over again and again. So for me, one of the signs that I take is that when I realize that I keep doing certain thing on a daily basis or for a period of like 2 or 3 months of time, that's a sign that I should hire someone to do that job for me, so that I can move on and I can bring the company to another level.
So that's very interesting. Good advice as well. So I think like it's very interesting to talk about the challenges, I guess, resource constraints, and also matching with your strength, right? What you are really good at and what you can bring to, I guess, the venture, and how you can leverage other people's strengths and capabilities for other parts, so that I guess your team collectively can actually scale up quite quick. So that's actually very important advice, I guess, for the Hackasia participant as well. So I also want to talk to Natalie as well, because you have many pivot. All the ideas seems cool. Like I guess like I would actually personally love to try one of your your product and travel experience. But I'm also thinking it might not be that easy to start your venture and pivot it and scale it, right? So from your experience, what are the challenges that you face as part of the journey?
I think one of the greatest challenges is the lack of certification system in Hong Kong around ecotourism. So we're essentially competing with a lot of other organizations that might not have the accreditation for doing similar things at a much cheaper price, because they get subsidies or they get buy-ins from people who don't really care about environmental component of it, but they get sold by the name. So I think it's like an uneven battle to say to begin with. So we had to understand very deeply what are our competitors, and even like we understand that they're not doing the same thing, but they're still in our same market, and we need to differentiate us by identifying rightly which is our audience that we wish to target and how do we match with their values. For example, one of the target groups we are targeting now is secondary school teachers. We realize that secondary school has a huge demand for these field trips and field experiences, eco tours. But then a lot of the times, teachers are just sourcing it from big names, organizations, and traditional green groups. So we try to stand out by adding more innovative elements into our tours and hiring in different university students as part-times who can help us curate our tour from design thinking perspective. We also try to source more ideas from our interns because we're hiring actual secondary school students who are users of these programs. So they're closest to the syllabus and they remember clearly like what are the focus area of the tours and how to share that knowledge in a fun way that will appeal to their peers. So we think youth empowerment is a core component of our success by understanding users' experience and using the whole empathy ideation process to develop our tour products. And we also keep doing that, iterating that process so to keep up to date with latest educational trends.
Great, thanks, Natalie. So now I actually want to pivot our discussion a little bit because we talk a lot about the ventures that you guys have built, how you start from like day zero to I guess where you guys are now. Like it's a constant pivot process. Actually, we want to talk more about maybe yourself, your journey as well. Because oftentimes when we hear about the stories of startup, we hear about maybe their successes as a company, but as an individual entrepreneurs, right? I'm sure that there's a lot that you guys have gone through as well. And I guess for a lot of the aspiring entrepreneurs and entrepreneur, like your sharing might be quite useful to help them understand better what they should be expecting if they take on the journey of starting to build something that is really meaningful and hopefully is something of impact, right, that venture. So I want to ask maybe two questions is like from your personal experience perspective, like what has been, I guess, like the most rewarding experience when you are doing your venture? And I guess what is the most, I guess, memorable, difficult experience that you guys have been through?
Do you want?
No, that's a very personal and tough question
Yeah,
to
that's
answer.
very deep.
Yeah, it's very deep.
Yeah, I think one of the most rewarding moment is that I always share these stories. At one time, I think around 2 years ago, when we were exhibiting our products in exhibitions in just HKCEC, there was an old lady. She's in her age of 60s, I think. She got pushed over to our booth by her husband on a wheelchair, and she got a stroke a couple of years ago, and her right hand couldn't move. She came to try on our product. I helped her put it on, and I helped her to move her fingers again. And the first reaction she had was that she turned around and looked over the shoulder and tell her husband that she wants to buy this. And I mean, and she had a smile on her face. That was very, very rewarding. It's very, very warm. That we know that we're on the right track. We're doing something that can help someone. And so that is the moment that I got. I think it's most rewarding in the past 5 years of my times doing here. And and we're talking about challenges. We have, I think we face challenge every day, and they're like very different. And it could be from like someone losing their shipments, or some customers that get delivered, or angry customers, or angry suppliers, whatever it could be. But I think a lot of the problems, a lot of the most challenging things comes back to itself as always about people. You have to find the right partners to help you go through the journey. You have to hire the right talents in different stage of your company. And nowadays, it's very difficult to recruit, even like for startups like us. And I heard from my fellow startups or fellow companies as well. It's very difficult to find good talents. And in terms of like when you try to expand your company, you have to work with different vendors, and they are people behind it, and you have to find investors, and it's just about relationship building, and it's always about people skills. So I think one of the challenge always comes back to the people and how you work with the people who can solve the problems. I always tell my team one thing is that um, don't dream that we can make the perfect products or we can solve every problem ourselves. But there's someone out there, or you who have a friend who has a friend who can solve the problem for you. So instead of just try and dig in and do it yourself and come back to like no results at all, why don't just reach out to find more friends and know more people who can solve the problem for you? So yeah, that would be one of the lessons that I learned around these years.
It's actually very interesting because what you're saying is the most rewarding experience is actually about people, like the smile you put on one individual. It's very interesting. It's not about like the success of the venture in terms of how big that is, but it's really starting from one individual, and hopefully more individuals can be impacted the same way. But also the challenges is about, I guess, also like you can't do everything alone, right? And there are many different people you work with, and how do you really bring together? So it's very interesting common traits that I'm hearing from your sharing. Yeah. So how about you, Natalie? So how about from your experience, what is the most rewarding elements? And I guess also the same question, like what are the challenges you face and how you really overcome that as an individual?
I guess I don't have any stories that can top Alvin's. That's super
Maybe the story
touching.
can be me, like introduce that to me. I really enjoy traveling and I just start traveling locally a lot more maybe.
Thank you. I guess one rewarding episode would be during one of our Long Fu Shan eco tour, a peak next to Hong Kong U. There was one lady, like middle-aged lady, who reached the peak and talked to like and said to us that thank you for bringing me up there because I never knew Hong Kong has such beautiful scenery, and I never knew I have the capability to walk uphill because she's not a big like sporty person, so she's never really tried to go up to a top of a mountain, especially when it looks difficult. And sometimes I think it is this power. This is this component of empowerment that we're able to tell people that they actually have the capability to travel around to adventure and to start their own journey, even in Hong Kong, even if they have some physical disabilities, they can still take an initiative. We've also done an initiative with Wheel Power Challenge to assess a route around southern Hong Kong Island that is barrier-free, like has access-free facilities along the way. So we saw that even people who are disabled wants this opportunity to travel around Hong Kong because it's even harder for them to travel overseas. So there's this natural need for them to go around, but it is hard to explore like restaurants that are friendly to the disabled people. So I think these are some rewarding moments during our journey. While for challenges, I'd say the biggest challenge I face personally is because, unlike Alvin's startup, we are a fully part-time organization. So all of our members, we have around 30 of them. They're mostly university students, and we remunerate them on a project basis. So whenever we have a tour, we draw on a pool of freelance tour guides, which have been trained by us previously. We run on this model because it is actually quite difficult for local tourism business to be financially sustainable given the variability of tours, and especially now during COVID. So one challenge is to maintain that freelance pool of tour guides and how to train them with our up-to-date syllabuses and standards in order that each of our tour delivers similar quality. And because it's a huge pool of people, we need to draw on different people at different time slots. So sometimes we might need to turn down requests from corporates or schools, and we're not able to reach that kind of maximum educational impact. But still, I think it allows us to be more flexible, and it inspires me how to manage people in a way that it's not only the monetary return that draws them in the pool, but the brand and the morale of the organization, that they feel proud to deliver a tour and feel proud to see the smiles they put on our audience's faces after the tours. So I guess it's like a continuous self-reflection on how to hold our members together to continue delivering more high-quality educational events.
So that's actually like interesting story because I was trying to compare maybe like the experience of Alvin and Natalie. So Alvin, you really all in, right? Like once you graduated, you have been working at that startup. And I remember I met you in some social innovation events before. Well, oh, it's so tough. And then like 2-3 years later, you're still there, right? So it's like really into that. But Natalie's approach is like, of course, you are still very passionate and supportive, but you're also thinking also like the power of other people as well, right? Engaging the tourist guides like as a on needed basis. It doesn't have to be all full time. So I'm going to get you guys' perspective as well. For a lot of the people, maybe I guess hearing this speech, they are thinking of, I have an idea, I have a venture. Do I really go full time building it, or can I build it alone, perhaps with I guess my main job, or maybe I'm a student, build it aside, alongside I guess my study. So what's your advice when it comes to I guess venture building? What is your approach? I mean, different people will have different experience and I guess advices, but from you guys' perspective, any thoughts around that?
Honestly, I think startup or building venture is not for everyone. It's like people are stood for different jobs, or they are not. They can't do that, or they're better doing something else. And I don't think that I think for a lot of startups or young early stage founders, I would actually tell them to take a step back, pause it, and think about that if you are really actually the best person to do it or not. Or you can find vendors, or you can find suppliers, or find a freelancer who can solve the problem for you. And or there are some people or some companies out there trying to solve that problem already. If you can't distinguish yourself or do better than them, don't. Or simply join them and have them be bigger things, because I think a single product company doesn't work. It's you have to be able to provide an all-rounded solution, service operations, as well as how to deliver your products to your customers. So that would be actually my advice. Don't do it right now. Just think about it first before you actually go to do it. And that would be the advice I would give myself like 5 years ago as well. Not that I was wrong, but I think that would be a very difficult thing to say to everyone. Because I mean, like if I look back, like no one ever told me not to do what I am doing today. But that's actually some very brutally honest advice that someone could give me, or and because like for some of our products that we went out, we got some good feedbacks and some like bad feedbacks, 50-50s. Like down the road, no one told us that we should not do that, because but we have to evaluate as ourselves. Like at the end of the day, we learned it by real life. We learned it from real life is that if we come back and sit down, stop developing that, and just do the math and calculate it, and it doesn't make sense. It is a big investment to solve a small problem, and it will generate a very, very small return, even for in the long term. So, but no one will tell you down the road. And because in Hong Kong, we have such supporting communities, and everyone just, oh, that's a good idea, you should do it, blah, 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 as well. But I tell you not, no. Just you can be honest to yourself is one of the biggest lessons that I learned.
So that's actually very interesting because I was thinking for Hackasia participant, like maybe like when you meet your mentors, when you meet your judges, they might be very supportive and think your idea is great. But I guess it's also like a constant self-reflection process, what you can do differently as well. So I think we have some questions around. So I will just wrap up perhaps with each of you maybe giving 2 or 3 advices to the Hackasia participant, regardless whether they are student and innovator, having an idea, wanting to build something up, or they are already like a social, kind of like a startup trying to solve sustainability challenges. Maybe just wrap up with maybe 2 things that you would give them as an advice.
I would quote from Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary General, at the end of COP26, the climate conference. He said, "The path of progress is not always linear. There are detours, but it is our fight for the climate. It is a fight for ourselves, so we must continue to fight on." I think this year's theme is Innovate the Sustainable Future, which is something that is core at Jardines and also at a lot of our BUs. We're really looking for solutions that can help us build a more sustainable operations, supply chain. And so I hope that if you do have an idea, please feel free to pursue it and to really understand deep users' experience and users' problem and try to address it. But keep in mind that it might not be an instant success. You might need to take more detours in order to get to the final goal. But sustainability is something that we should always work on and not to finish the fight because you feel hopeless.
It's like Greek. Hold on. Okay, so Alvin, last comment from you.
I think be passionate about what you do, as well as be patient, because really, like Natalie said, things don't change across overnight. For like a real example for us is that for medical or healthcare industries, the sales cycle is very, very long. You have to be very persistent and be patient and trust that and know that you're doing the right thing. Otherwise, you can't survive for over a year.
So we have some questions. We have some questions. I know I've been asking a lot of questions. So I think the audience also actually got some questions for our two very successful young entrepreneurs here. So maybe we can have the first question.
Hi there, thanks. There's two questions on the line here. Maybe each panelist can take one each. So the first question is, are there any particular skills or qualities that you think as a student you should equip ourselves with to become an entrepreneur? That's the first question. And the second question is, do you have any tips on how to build a team with the right motivation, especially in the initial days of the startup, and also who to avoid at that stage? So two different types of questions. Maybe we can decide who will take which one.
I guess I can do the students one because I did the first one, like qualities of students. Sorry. Yeah, so speaking of qualities that you look for in an entrepreneur for students, I think the first thing is time management, because when you're still a student, you have a lot of other priorities to balance, especially your academic career. So how are you going to dedicate time and attention to your startup, and then to think of scaling it up so that it become your full-time career? And another thing is networking. I think networking is especially important when you are still a student, because probably the immediate circles, social circles around you are not the people who might help your startup to a very large extent. You might need to reach out to people who are working in the government, who knows a bit about the policy background of the issue you're addressing, or you need to know people who are already building a successful similar startup. For us at FAIR, we started reaching out to some large green groups in Hong Kong to understand how the green group charity model works and how we can differentiate from them by being a social enterprise that is focused on environmental issue. So I think is to be brave enough to reach out to these wider networks so that they can help you connect the dots. And I think when you're in a student community, you're not afraid to fail, and people tend to be more supportive of your idea. So don't worry that people will not respond, because usually they're very supportive of you, and you need to leverage on these few years as a student, using your brand name as a student to reach out to different people so that you're harmless to them. And you can also secretly build a very resilient organization.
That's great sharing. So like, Alvin, you're gonna take the second question.
That's a quite long
Who
one,
to
right?
get,
Who
who not to get.
Good to avoid.
I think it really depends on what kind of business or company you're trying to build. It could be very skills oriented, or it could be a general company that doesn't require a lot of technical skills. It varies. It depends on your business nature. You as the founder should be able to know that what kind of persons you're trying to look for at what stage of the company, either as a business guy or either as a software developer or a product designer. You should be the one who knows what kind of resources that you lack of at which point. I wouldn't tell you who to avoid, because I think everyone is like a book. You can learn something even from the worst person that you know around you. It could be a bad example that you don't want to do or don't want to go down that path with. But I think I generally just try to look for genuine friends that I can make, people who doesn't lie to you, and people just speak of the truth and tell you if they can do it, if they can deliver it. That's one kind of persons that you might be careful of, is those over-promisers. I wouldn't say that they lie to you. some salesperson, they can sell to some companies about that, what they can do in the future. If they can deliver it, that's not a lie, all right? If they can't deliver it, that's a lie. So make a difference. Spot the difference and be careful of those overpromisers.
That's interesting. Maybe I'll just wrap up with last question because I think there was a question about how do you keep people motivated? Because I think from our conversation, there are a lot of great success that you guys achieved, but the journey is very tough as well when it comes to social innovation, when it comes to sustainability. So any advice on keeping yourself and the team motivated, as well as the Hack Asia participant? I know you guys are working really hard now. What are some of your last words on that part?
Progress, I think. People like to see progress, even though, and they want to see when they can get rewarded. That might not be financially rewarded, it could be other things. And one example is that if you make an 8-hour long movie, no one would watch it. If you make 8 episodes of 1 hour series, people usually finish it.
That's how Netflix works, right?
Exactly,
Yeah,
in
people
one day or
addicted.
two, right?
Seeing the
So people like to see
progressing.
progress and split it up by bits. And as a founder myself, I try to split up the task in terms of progress so that they can see what they have actually built and what they have gone to at which point.
Natalie, any final words on the motivation part? How do you keep yourself motivated and perhaps kind of advice for our participants as well?
Yeah, I think one thing is goal alignment, aligning with the team periodically. What is our eventual goal? For example, it's mitigating climate change or helping people adapt to the transition. By establishing these goals and checking in with your team regularly, I think it's very useful to keep the team together.
Okay, that's great. Actually, I think we have one more questions from the floor. So maybe we can use that as a wrap up before we finally close. I think there are more questions, so I think we are possibly out of time already. So I guess thank you so much, Alvin and Natalie, for coming here today. So for people on the line from Hack Asia, we hope that their journey actually inspire you when it comes to being an entrepreneur, right? What you're actually going through. And I hope Alvin's and Natalie experience will be useful to you. We know that we are all solving different sustainability challenges and all our ventures, all our ideas actually take on a different path, but always get connected with people from different backgrounds, learn from them, and hopefully there can be some collaboration between many people together as well. So I think with that in mind, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll actually have another section, so I'll pass back the time to Justin.